Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, gamer boys and girls! Welcome back to the pod. For some reason, both we and me are playing similar games lately. Both of them are fresh and crisp roguelikes. Last week we played and presented Griftlands, which is a deck builder in a sci-fi setting with very nicely drawn graphics. If you haven't seen it yet, click on the card in the corner and check it out. On the other end of the spectrum, this game isn't funny or cutely animated. It is incredibly dark and grim. So much so that my significant other couldn't watch me play this, even though she usually comes all in with me and these projects. Did this bother me? Well, while I did miss her regarding the game's visuals, absolutely not. I enjoyed drowning in this world of dread and horror. So what is this game? None other than Tainted Grail Conquest, a spin-off to the board game Tainted Grail Fall of Avalon. Developed and published by Polish studio Awaken Realms Digital. Just like the previously mentioned Griftlands, this is also a deck builder roguelike RPG that slowly builds in complexity and scope over a player's multiple runs. So let's talk about the game's development first, some history. Then I will walk you through the story and the gameplay. Originally I wanted this section to be a bit broader than it is now, and I have reached out to the devs to ask some questions about the development itself. But sadly my questions met with deaf ears. Or maybe it has something to do that we are a very small YouTube channel. I don't know. So instead of getting my info from first hand, I scoured the World Wide Web for some info. See, I'm a man who doesn't mind if his hands get dirty. So this game originally was announced as a bonus for backers of the Kickstarter for Tainted Grail The Fall of Avalon, the board game, back in 2018. It started slowly with one programmer, one artist, working on the core of it all, and the game was slowly growing in scope because Awaken Realms didn't want to make a simple board game conversion. By the spring of 2019, the team kept growing, and also in December 2019, the first alpha gameplay of the game's story campaign was released. It was available to Kickstarter backers and it was generally received very well. So much so that the devs went on a holiday, with thoughts rushing in their heads how to change the game in a way that it would please the majority of the people. Coming back after a refreshing holiday, they reworked the entire combat into 3D. In January 2020, they started working on the game's campaign. They moved from a sculpted map to a generated tile-based map, and they upscaled the world. The game entered early access a year ago, and it was finally released a little later, when I could finally get my hands on it. Okay, so let's talk about gameplay. First thing first, in this game you get to decide how your character will look like. As you can see on the video, I was aiming for a Geralt of Rivia look from the Witcher series, sprinkled with a huge-ass Celtic looking raven tattoo. Once you're done and following the short intro, you get to choose your first predefined class, and you jump into your first run. In the first 10 seconds of your run, the game introduces the weirdness, with a Y. The weirdness is a mysterious fog-like thing that acts as a sort of membrane that hides the real world around you, and until it is repelled, it twists and deforms everything behind it, making the world around you extremely dangerous. But of course you have a way to repel this, and these are the weird candles. Weird candles can be lit to clear the area around you. The more you light, the safer you will be, which also translates into the fights being easier. However, the loot will also be less than otherwise. Or you can choose to just wander into the weirdness and embrace its twisted horror for more loot and more stuff, and more stories to discover. This mechanic heavily resembles the torchlight mechanic from Darkest Dungeon, and kind of serves the same purpose. The difference being, the nature of Tainted Grail will force you to do a couple of dark runs in order to see what kind of stories lie in the depths of the weirdness, while in Darkest Dungeon it was just a supposedly harder playstyle for more loot. Next up is how you traverse during the game. Well, most of these roguelikes have a procedurally generated map, where you pick one of a few available paths to reach the very end. This aspect of the game is almost identical, only difference being you can choose from the beginning where to go. You may skip fights, loots, stories, NPCs, etc. Or you can explore every fight, every location, every NPC. It's totally up to the player. but just to keep that in mind, the aforementioned weird candles eventually will burn out, and the weirdness might swallow you. Before we talk about the fighting in this game, first we have to see the characters, the classes and the subclasses. In your first run you will be restricted to the Weird Hunter class, and depending on how well you manage, not only will you potentially unlock more cards and perks for this class, but you might unlock another class as well. Overall there are 9 classes of characters divided into 3 factions. These being the Watchers of Tuatan, in which the Apostate, the Sentinel and the Zealot belong. These classes are, in my opinion, the hardest and the most technical ones, as they are glass cannons and they rely on flipping their cards, meaning they have several cards that do one thing when played, then they flip sides, and when they are drawn next time, they will have another effect attached to them, and will revert back to the previous state when played, and so on and so forth. These classes rely heavily on game knowledge, as it is vital to know when to defend and when to strike. The next faction are the Children of Morrigan. This group consists of the Pathfinder, the Weird Hunter, and the Berserker, and they represent the faction that takes on the role of the melee fighter. Their cards are mainly focused on blocking attacks, reflecting damage, and reducing enemies' armor. And finally, the last faction is the Moon Ring, where the Summoner, the Blood Mage, the Necromancer belong. The focus on this faction is on using summons to attack, block, buff, or debuff. The Moon Ring have several different summons at their disposal, each serving its own purpose. These summons are the Golem. When the Golem is active, damage aimed at your team while redirect is active on the Golem will instead hit the Golem. But be careful of AoE attacks, as the Golem will suffer the full extent. Next up is the Abomination. While the Abomination is active, it performs AoE attacks against all enemies on the battlefield, and it grows stronger after each activation. The Worm performs multiple single target attacks and reduces the enemy's armor. And finally the Fae, this is the group support healer, depending on the class. Fae grants passive improvements. All summons but the Faes can be chosen as a starter summon that automatically will spawn at the start of every combat. All the characters are unique despite belonging to the same faction. So let me give you an example, and let's go with the Moon Ring characters. In here the summoner conjures deadly minions out of thin air, but he's connected to them via a magical link, meaning every time a minion gets hit, the summoner receives damage relative to their level. Summoners' minions need to be activated through spells, however they can be promoted and grow in power endlessly. In contrast, the Blood Mage offers their own HP in order to summon minions to his side. His minions are automatically activated and promoted at the start of each turn. However, minions overcharge upon reaching level 4, this means they trigger a special effect and disappear from combat, and each minion has a different overcharge effect. So despite the many similarities, should you play them and take a closer look at their mechanics, you'll find that they play very differently. Every class not only has its own set of cards that can be unlocked, but also its own set of perks and ultimate abilities, meaning the variety you will face is tremendous. I won't break down every character this time because this video would be at least 2 hours long, but if you guys are interested, I'll be more than happy to make a separate video on them, so let me know in the comments below. Okay, so let's talk about the main selling points of the game, the fight. So when you choose your class and leave the village for the first time, which serves as a base in the game, you venture out into the weirdness to blast some ass and kill some monsters. I won't talk about in here how the monsters and the enemies look like, I'll talk about these when I talk about the game's presentation, but for now, let this be enough. Damn son, did you just eat the whole village? Whoa, well I'm glad we're not meeting in person because I would definitely puke on you. Oh well, who might you be? Yikes. So, as all in the deck builder roguelites out there, you have a deck, you draw cards, use them for damage, block, weakening, buffing yourself, etc. It is all the same mechanics, nothing new. You and your opponent both have a pool of health, and the aim is to reduce your opponents to 0, through playing cards from your hand, without dying in the process, of course. In order to win the run, which consists of 3 main parts, 3 mini-bosses and the main boss, it is imperative not to die, obviously. You pay for your cards from your mana pool, which starts at 3, but it can be manipulated to get higher, or enemies can make it smaller, resulting in you being able to play less cards. As mentioned before, all of the 9 characters have different ultimate abilities. These need to be charged in order to use them. The devs implemented this mechanic in a way that it can be used at 25, 50, 75% charge for lesser effects, so it is not the best idea to charge them to the max. These ultimates vary, some deal damage, some interact with minions, etc. You can protect yourself against damage by giving yourself a barrier that acts like a second pool of health, and it has to be depleted before you can be damaged, or you can use block, which completely negates one instance of incoming damage. Of course, there are other mechanics like usable items that can heal you, damage the enemy, give you buffs or debuffs the enemy, or items that have random effects. You can also loot a noose, which is made from a very good quality rope that can be used to end your misery. During the fights, the animations look amazing, and overall it is very fun to fight against these monsters and eldritch creatures. During your adventures you will get your hands on some runestones that can have different effects on your weapon and armor, and there are plenty of them, and they can be upgraded as well, so the variations are endless. After every encounter you gain XP and some loot or currency, and after every level up you can choose one of 3 cards to obtain, and a skill to gain. Progression wise, every card you have unlocked remain unlocked for the future runs and can be picked as well. And rest assured, you will have to attempt multiple runs because the game is ruthless. So much so that the devs included an easy mode in the menu just for grinding. And since I'm a man and not a sissy, I have never touched that mode, but I have to admit after several hours of play, I have definitely played with the thought of doing so. Now let's talk about the presentation itself, the music, the graphics, the voice acting, the overall look and the feel of the game. So Tainted Grail is dark, heavy, twisted and grim. And I fucking love that. I always drawn to the macabre, so it fits me really well, but I'm not sure about most of the people. Tainted Grail isn't just a roguelike, it is a very story-heavy game and a damn good one at that. All the NPCs I have encountered are genuinely interesting. The voice acting is on point. The narrator's sad, fragile voice is like a tragedy echoing back from the past. And please just listen to this.
He's just a lost soul, wandering between clouds of weirdness with a fading weird candle in his hand. His eyes light up when he sees you. You notice that he is not actually looking at you. He's looking at your candle.
And the NPCs are just as amazing. Let it be a blacksmith or a twisted otherworldly creature. Only listening to the voice acting would be enough to set this dark scene, but the music and the art are what really make you believe that you are in this world. The music is amazing, it has a Celtic kick to it, and it is either very heavy on drums or string instruments. The music is made by Dunheim, a Danish musician, so if you want to check out the music, now you know where to look for it. The graphics are on the level of well made, nothing to write home about, but good enough that you can see these twisted ass monsters who just climbed out from a collective nightmare and ready to feast on your flesh and souls. So we can see that the designers definitely made an effort while designing the NPCs and enemies. So let's talk about this story, the other big selling point of this game. The whole game is set in Avalon, where King Arthur and his knights conquered the Fort Dwellers, the ones who lived there before. Humans have settled around menhirs. These are big pylons made of weird candles that banish the weirdness away. The mystic fog that once covered most of Avalon when humans first came there, and remains to this day, despite Arthur and Merlin's best efforts. Ever since King Arthur, his powerful adversary, and most of his knights have vanished, the power of the menhirs has weakened and is since fading. And this is where our hero comes in. Now during our adventures, the main goal in this game is to rebuild our village by gathering resources and fighting people in the surrounding weird infested areas and convince them to settle in our village. Recruited villagers will offer their services in order to aid us in our quest to defeat the evil forces that keeps us prisoner in this strange world. Villagers can be found through encounters with non-hostile NPCs or locations that you might come across in the weirdness. And while some might easily be persuaded to settle in your village, others will require to fulfill several quests in order to gain their trust. Let me tell you, each NPC's story is very captivating. Everything is fleshed out till the finest detail, and it's a true joy following through every storyline. So let's talk about some tips and tricks before I'm revealing the verdict of this game. Tip number 1. When starting a new run, try to decide what your goal is. Trying to go as far as you can while trying to uncover the mysteries of Avalon? Or would you rather get resources to get stronger for a future run? If so, forget weird candles, as in the Total Dark the loot is bigger and better. If you are in for the completion, try to ration your weird candles and try not to backtrack. It is a no-brainer, I know, but I went in headfirst a couple of times not knowing what my class actually does, and got wiped very early in the run. So read and learn. Try to get as many HP potions and barrier providers as you can, you will need them for sure. And later on, especially in the third stage, the enemies will hit you more than once, so blocking will be less and less effective. Once you become comfortable with a class, in the collections menu, read through your unlocked perks and try to find 2-3 that combo with each other. You can make your life much easier if you know what kind of skills and perks you may get. This game is ruthless and will test your perseverance. Take pauses if necessary. And finally, the verdict. Based on the 30-something hours I have spent with this game, I can but only suggest this game. It is all around a great game. It is dark, yeah, but I loved its atmosphere and the overall implementation of the mechanics. Although I love this game and I'm still playing this since I've bought at release, I have to acknowledge that the graphics could be a bit better, and this game isn't for everyone, as you will have to do a lot of runs. But all the stories and all the fights will compensate you for the blood and sweat and the time that you will dedicate for this. Thank you for watching. If you like this review, please like this video, as it helps us immensely, and maybe subscribe to this channel. We'll be adding more and more in-depth reviews, and I also wish to hear your voices. If you play this game, what are your thoughts about it? Or are you maybe just thinking about trying it? Also, if you have any suggestions, please let me hear it. Thank you again for your time that you have spent with us, we really appreciate it. And see you soon in the next video. Escape Pod out.